Hello, everyone. So today I would like to share some really fascinating facts about really sweet potatoes. You're probably familiar with just like the mouth-watering aroma of roasted sweet potatoes from street vendors, or the golden and syrupy sweet potato dish often served on festive tables. These roots have always been cherished in so many parts of the world as a sort of like side dish, and sometimes even as like a sort of like substitute for like staple food. So yeah, the story I want to tell just goes beyond just the usual idea that really sweet potatoes are just so delicious and healthy. In fact, sweet potatoes may very well be just one of the earliest naturally modified crops on Earth. Even more surprisingly, they're pretty closely related to a common plant with trumpet-shaped flowers that you might see along the roadside. So that plant is just like the kind of like morning glory. Imagine a branch of like the morning glory family, except that nature actually worked like a bit of genetic magic on it, just transforming like one of its wild descendants into the sweet and tasty root like we know just today. You might just be wondering how a kind of root that grows in the soil could be related to a kind of vine that produces trumpet-shaped like flowers. I will just explain the whole story so soon, including what happened 8,000 years ago during a pretty remarkable gene transfer event. It was like a form of natural genetic engineering that turned just a really simple wild flower into the sweet potato we really enjoy. So many identities. So people sometimes say sweet potato as if it is just a sweeter version of a potato, which leads so many to believe it must be really closely related to the classic potato. However, despite similar names, they're not just from the same plant family at all. So regular potatoes belong to a group that includes tomatoes and eggplants. So basically, while sweet potatoes belong to the morning glory group. So that is why potatoes form tubers, which are actually like swollen underground stems. And so like sweet potatoes form like swollen root, how like sweet potatoes got their name. And the term, so sweet potato can actually be traced back to the Caribbean, where like the Taino, like people called it batata. So when Spanish like explorers brought different root crops to Europe, so many names were so confused or blended. Batata was eventually modified and lent part of its sound to what became sort of like potato in English. So in a way, the name of the sweet potato really helped really inspire the word like potato. It just like the classic potato, like sweet potatoes originated in the Americas. So when Columbus reached the New World, Europeans were just like so astonished by all the unfamiliar crops they encountered, including sweet potatoes, corn, tomatoes, and cocoa. These discoveries spread worldwide, like during the age of exploration, like forever changing the way people just ate around the globe. One large family, sweet potatoes belong to the same plant genus as many like small, like wild morning glories. Picture like a meadow of morning glories with like thin, like inedible roots that like come in a range of color, from blues to purples to pinks. It would never really cross your mind to just eat those. Yet somewhere in this large family, maybe just one member underwent a really pretty dramatic change. Its roots became so thick, fleshy, and rich in starch and natural sugars when humans realized just how tasty these roots were, so they began to cultivate them. So eventually, just arriving at the sweet potatoes like we really enjoy today. Searching for the ancestors, a century of scientific puzzle. Modern sweet potatoes are actually kind of like hexaploid, meaning their genetic material is more complex than that kind of ordinary diploid plants. So scientists have long believed they originated from the hybridization of just like two distinct ancestors, just like one ancestor, which has diploid genetics, was actually easier to identify. It is a type of wild morning glory with pencil-thin roots, so found in the whole Caribbean region. And its genes show like it is just so closely related to sweet potatoes. So the other ancestor, which was actually believed to be like tetraploid, remained elusive for nearly 100 years. In the year 2022, a research team from Oxford University discovered a white and purple morning glory in Ecuador genetic tests always revealed that this whole plant might just be the whole missing puzzle piece. So the newly identified wild morning glory appears to have combined with the other ancestor at some point. How could two plants without starchy roots create one that does? Even though scientists identified these two morning glory relatives, both have only slender roots. So how did their hybrid offspring end up with the large starchy roots that define a sweet potatoy roots that definitely like a sweet potato? This question perplexed researchers until they found a remarkable clue in the sweet potato genome. Nature's like genetic insertion, how a bacterium shaped sweet potato. In the year 2015, researchers analyzed the whole genomes of sweet potatoes from different continents. They just made an astonishing discovery. Basically, every variety they studied carried an extra piece of DNA that just came from a bacterium called Agrobacterium. And this bacterium is capable of inserting its DNA into plant cells, so causing abnormal growths that can turn into tumor-like structures. So present day. So researchers just routinely use it in genetic engineering. Yet it just appears that nature actually got there first, at least 8,000 years ago. So a wild morning glory plant was infected by this bacterium, basically causing part of its DNA to be integrated into the plant. Once humans found a root that was both tasty and easy to cultivate, they began selecting for those traits over many generations of cultivation, like these naturally modified descendants of the morning glory just became just like sweet potatoes. So this is why we always say sweet potatoes are not only natural genetically modified organisms, but ones that always happen to have enlarged roots. So that bacterial DNA played a really major role in making them like the starchy root we know. Do sweet potatoes flower? Yes, they have a sort of morning glory face. So many people have never seen a blooming sweet potato plant, but it can actually indeed just produce small. So trumpet-shaped flowers, reflecting its connection to morning glory. In tropical climates, with temperatures around 20 to 30 degrees and shorter days, like sweet potatoes, flower, and form tiny green seed-like capsules. The seeds inside are small and black. In places with longer summer days, like sweet potatoes, often do not just bloom. Farmers also commonly use vine cuttings to propagate new plants, which is an easy way to maintain the desired trait. So the kind of global journey and a mystery of the South after Columbus. So European colonists and traders carried sweet potatoes to various parts of the world, including Africa and Asia, where they basically just helped fill gaps in local food supplies. Yet there is a pretty significant mystery related to the South Pacific. So Polynesian people appear to have obtained pretty sweet potatoes long before European contact. Archaeological and linguistic evidence suggests that they may actually have journeyed across the ocean to South America, so then brought sweet potatoes back. So the word Kumara is actually spoken both along parts of the Peruvian coast and actually in some sort of Polynesian sort of languages, which is unlikely to be just a coincidence. So thanks to sweet potatoes, island communities in the South Pacific really gained a reliable, productive crop, just allowing populations to grow and even just making it possible to construct monumental achievements, such as the famous statues of Easter Island. Really, really high yield and nutrient rich. So why not a worldwide staple? The whole in theory. So sweet potatoes can generate a very high amount of calories per unit of land. So why do they not rival wheat or rice just as a global staple? One reason is just digestive discomfort. So sweet, sweet potatoes have a lot of fiber and certain sugar alcohols that can cause bloating. They're also quite sweet, and so not everyone likes the idea of eating them day after day. So many cultures prefer staples that are milder in taste and simpler to digest. Just as a result, sweet potatoes often serve as a side dish or dessert in wealthier kind of areas. Just a world of variety because of their complex genetics and ease of propagation from vine cuttings. So sweet potatoes come in more so than just 7,000 varieties. Even so, more so than just regular potato. Some have orange flesh and are really, really sweet and really moist, while others have like white or pale flesh and a drier texture. The orange fleshed varieties are really popular for like roasting or making sweet dishes. So the lighter fleshed kinds can serve as a kind of staple substitute. In any case, they are still part of the morning glory family. In some places, the young leaves of sweet potatoes are even just cooked just as greens, sort of part 11 ornamental types in confusion about like just purple that are just sort of like ornamental varieties grown mainly for their attractive leaves with just like roots that may be bitter or otherwise unsuitable for eating. There are also some sort of varieties with like purple tinted flesh, sometimes called purple sweet potatoes, which can be confused with other tubers that have similar coloring, but belong to different species. So there's a whole range of crops that could be called yam. So why do we just call it a natural genetically, just sort of going back to like our main point, like sweet potatoes are considered like a naturally like genetically modified version of the morning glory because they have like a remarkably complicated ancestry and also received an unusual genetic gift from a bacteria. A hybridization event produced a plant with a very complex genome, but that alone did not create like a starchy root. So the key just happened when that plant actually became sort of infected with a bacterium like that sort of inserted its DNA, will definitely just allowing the roots to grow large and store sugars. So humans actually saw the value of this really sweet and nutritious root, and after thousands of years of cultivation. So in other words, sweet potatoes went through a natural genetic experiment about 8,000 years ago. We often discuss like the safety of like genetically modified foods in modern time. Yet sweet potatoes have been eaten for like centuries without causing issues. At the very least, this reminds us that nature itself has just been creating such modifications for like a very long time. So just seeing sweet potatoes in a new light. After learning all this, perhaps you will never actually look at a sweet potato in quite the same way. It is actually not merely a sugary root dug from the ground. It is actually just a really fascinating relative of like the morning glory family, sort of shaped by both natural processes and human hands. For centuries, it thrived in the Americas, then spread worldwide. So just becoming like a really high, like yielding and like nutritious source of food. Digital, just like so potatoes, have sustained countless communities during hard times and helped the peoples of the South Pacific achieve feats that still amaze us, just like even now. This sweet treat remains like on dinner tables everywhere. Who would have just imagined such a surprising story behind a crop that looks like just so ordinary nature, just so proves to be more inventive than we can ever imagine. Kind of conclusion. We have explored why sweet potatoes are so distinct from regular potatoes, like how they belong to the whole morning glory family, like how their genetic puzzle was sort of like and how they spread around the world. So finally, we revealed that sweet potatoes are essentially just like morning glories transformed by a helpful bacterium through the combined efforts of nature and human selection. When you next enjoy a really roasted sweet potato, remember the genetic journey that began 8,000 years ago. You may find yourself feeling like a new kind of sense of appreciation just for this kind of like really tender magic, really, really sweet delight. The story of the sweet potato reminds us that nature is actually both an artist and an engineer. It has spent countless ages experimenting with genes, sort of like